ACCG's policy team serves on our board of directors. And the partnership with ACCG goes back many years, working on a variety of different issues, and particularly closely together on transportation issues. And many of you are aware, from our perspective, that critical partnership stems from the fact that local governments in Georgia maintain so much of our transportation infrastructure across the state. So back in 2015 and transit expansion and T-Spliced and all kinds of other issues since then. Dave is from Peach County, worked with the Webster County Commissioner for a number of years before he joined ACCG back in 2009 and became the executive director of ACCG back in April 2018. So it's been an eventful couple of years, Dave, and grateful for the opportunity to have worked with you on a number of different issues. And in his spare time, Dave is a musician, loves to write songs and play guitar and sing. And so maybe we'll have him do something at the end of the call if we have time. Dave, how's it going for both I guess for ACCG as an organization? We're just up the street from you, but it seems like a world away at times. And what are you hearing from your members as we kind of transition from down to some version of reentry?
Yeah, Seth, I'll be glad to answer that question. But first, I want to say that we're not going to end the meeting with my music because we're going to end on a sour note. So, ACCG is like a lot of other organizations that are based in Atlanta. We had the ability and we made the decision in early March to send all of our people home and work from home. And we continue to be in that posture. I personally live 150 miles south of Atlanta in Webster County. I did grow up in Peach County, but I moved to Webster County shortly after I graduated from high school. And I've been here ever since, live on the family farm, and I used to be a farmer. But through a series of changes, ended up with ACCG and obviously was appointed as the executive director. But we made this call, and so all of our staff have been working from home with very little staff travel out to the counties. And we're going to remain in this posture probably until we exit phase 2 of the reopening guidelines to try to adhere to what the governor and I think the mayor of Atlanta has made some decisions too. So we're going to remain in this posture for a little while longer, but we're looking forward to being back in the office as soon as it's safe to be there.
Dave, what would you say as we move kind of from lockdown phase to different approaches to reentry and reactivation? What would you say is the number one challenge facing local governments right now from your perspective?
So whether it's as acute as local officials have believed or not, I think will be determined only in a historical context. But the fear of being infected by someone coming from the public into a county facility. So these staff members, the elected officials, their staff who are in those office spaces or who are having to interact with the public on some ongoing basis. And obviously the public safety face of local government is probably the most interactive, with police officers, sheriff's deputies, EMS, all those people that are out there interacting. They have probably the greater exposure. But I'll give you an example. I was talking to the House and County chairman, and they reopened their offices. I think it's been a couple of weeks ago now. And he said that the tax office alone had over 400 people come in that day. So there was a pent-up demand, a backlog of people needing to take care of business. And so when they opened up, now you've got somebody standing at the counter that's taking that information, and they're exposed to not only dozens, but hundreds of people coming in. So we've got those kind of challenges and sanitation protocols and social distancing, all of that aside, people still have a fear. So I think it's going to be a while before that abates.
Have you seen a difference? And I'm sure you probably have, and maybe you can elaborate. I'm sure there probably is a difference. And if so, what have you seen kind of as a difference for rural counties versus our more metro or urban, suburban counties? Are there significant differences that you're seeing between the challenges that they're facing as we get into this reentry phase?
Yes, I'll address that in two ways. I want to distinguish between the way that I think counties responded and then what I think is going to be the longer term impact from a financial perspective. So when some particularly metro area counties, metro Atlanta area counties really truncated their operations and moved to a work from home model or doing things online, in some of the more rural communities, particular ones that did not ever get any significant caseload from COVID-19, a lot of those rural counties just really never did change their basis of operation. They continue to stay open. They may have put in some less stringent requirements, but they never really did truncate to any significant degree their operations, whereas some of the metro counties did. And I think likewise, the reopening then, for those that never really did close their doors, there's no significant change. For the ones that did significantly curtail their operations, then obviously they've had to create and hopefully adhere to some strategy, effective strategy, hopefully, to reopen while being safe. On the financial side, I think that we're going to see, and time will prove whether this is accurate or not, but I think we're going to see very disparate impacts financially to the counties based upon the type of economy they had. So in the 9 weeks since we closed our office and went to the work from home model, I've only been to Atlanta one time, and it looked like a ghost town downtown, and that's been about 3 weeks ago. So if you think about the kind of economy that's downtown, and this is true in other metropolitan centers, you've got services that lend themselves to a work from home model, like ACCG, like the Chamber, like others, financial centers. So a lot of that work can be done from a remote environment. But if you get to the rural parts of the state where the economy is primarily based on agriculture or forestry or both, maybe some manufacturing, you know, you can't cut down the tree and get it to the mill and manufacture it and turn it into toilet tissue if you're working from home. Somebody has to be on the machine and operate it and get that tree down, take it to the mill and process it. So I think there are very distinct patterns that are related to the type of economy we have. And I think that related, we're going to see more impact of financial losses in the areas that had the telework model available compared to a county like I live in, where for day after day, there were trucks coming by my home that were loaded down with lumber products or timber products that were going to a mill. So I think that we're going to see counties that had a very high reliance upon sales tax take a significant hit, whereas a county like mine that has a relatively low sales tax base be less affected because we're more dependent upon property tax than we are on sales tax.
I think that's a really insightful point, and it speaks to one of the things that Jeff was talking about a few minutes ago as he was looking and talking through the different impacts that were going to be there for MARTA. They're obviously heavily dependent on sales taxes in some of these metro Atlanta jurisdictions, and they're, I think, anticipating a fairly significant impact from that change. Most of the folks on the call today that are involved with our board and the business climate committee with the chamber have some connection to or some interest in infrastructure development. Do you see, and it may be too early to tell, the data may not be there yet, but do you see significant impacts to things like SPLOST renewals or SPLOST programs or development of those kind of capital programs in different local governments across the state as a result of those changes to sales tax? Is that something you think might be a challenge moving forward?
It's difficult to say at this point what impact it might have on pending votes on SPLOST. I'm not aware today of how many of those are going to be on the ballot this year for the primary election or the general election. So I can't really address that specifically. I can make some general comments, though. I think, number one, it's a really good time if a local government wants to borrow some funds for long-term capital projects. It's a really good time. Interest rates are really low, and I think they can be very competitive. I suspect that there will be some that take a conservative mindset, and I say some, meaning elected leaders, that will not want to take on debt in this era of uncertainty. But it's a really good time because of the interest rate market. So I suspect that wise decisions will look long-term, knowing that we are going to overcome this pandemic, that we will return to some sense of normal operations and that the economy will resume. We're already seeing that. If you look at airline traffic, passenger traffic is up, I think, for 5 consecutive weeks. That tells me that people are finally starting to gain some renewed sense of confidence and go back to business. But I suspect it's going to be many months or maybe even a year or more before we get back to anything that approximates what we had before this struck. One point that I do want to make in that regard is that last year, the one chamber of the legislature passed the Marketplace Facilitator Act, and the other chamber passed it this year, and the governor signed it before the pandemic hit, and that went into effect on April the 1st. So when we think about the loss in sales tax, it's going to be mitigated to some effect by the legislation that is effective now and these marketplace facilitators having to collect sales taxes. So, for instance, I have not been to a retail store like a Walmart for 9 weeks, but I have been purchasing things online and having them delivered to my home, and those sales taxes are being collected and will be remitted the state and the local portion appropriately. So I think there's going to be some mitigation to the sales tax hit in that regard. But when we think about infrastructure, it's important, in my view, to take the long-term view. And I can't enforce that or force that upon local officials who make the decisions. But if I were still a sitting county commissioner and I served in that capacity for 14 years, I would be looking at this as an opportunity to get a low interest rate loan for a long period of time to finance some structures, that infrastructure projects that we've been needing, and put that in the context of, am I going to be able to pay for it? And I said, I think the answer is yes, but we need to structure those loans in a way that allows for recovery in the economy before we have to take that, to take on those debt reservice payments.
I've got a couple of more questions, but for the folks on the phone, if you have a question you'd like to ask Dave, if you can just raise your hand or chat in the chat box, then Allison Plummer, who's our moderator today, can unmute your line so you can ask a question of Dave as we move forward. Dave, obviously we're headed into June, where the legislature is going to resume their legislative session. We're not sure if it's going to be on the 11th or the 15th, but sometime that second week of June. We have been told by legislative leaders that there will be the opportunity to take up some additional matters to the budget as capacity and bandwidth allows. Are there items out there important to local governments that y'all will be asking the legislature to consider as we conclude the legislative session?
So I'll be honest and tell you that it's not a conversation that I've had in the last day or two with Clint Mueller or Kathleen, who's on the call. Kathleen's on the call. So they're better positioned to answer that than I am. I think that the prevailing wisdom is that the legislature is going to deal with the budget, and pretty much that's it. I've not personally seen a budget proposal other than we know we're looking at a 14% cut. We have asked, last week we met with the governor and we asked if he had a sense about what the impact would be to local governments and counties specifically. And he wasn't really, he didn't give any definitive answers in that respect to know what those impacts would be. He said it's a little bit early. Obviously, it's over in the Senate and we'll see what they come out with. But I'm not aware at this point of any specific proposal that would impact local governments. But obviously, that's going to be our priority, is looking for whatever is proposed and how it would impact county governments.
My last question for you, David, and then I'll stop for a minute and see if anyone else on the line has questions or comments they'd like to bring forward. As we kind of enter into a period of optimistic uncertainty, I suppose you could say, on the business community side, from the private sector side, what can we do to be good partners? And I asked this question of Jeff as we were closing as well. What can we do to be good partners with our local governments? I live in Cobb County, and there are folks on the call I know that live all across Metro Atlanta and other areas in the state. What can we do to be supportive of our county commissioners and county managers moving forward?
Seth, the first thing I want to say is just be patient. It's an unfortunate era that we live in this regard. In the context of social media, and the platform that everybody has access to be critical, it's very easy to be critical. It's much more difficult to be informed and to make good decisions. And that's what we all want and expect of our elected leadership, is to be informed and to make good decisions. But even the best laid decisions, the best thought out decisions, are still potentially controversial. There's almost nothing that everybody agrees upon. So rather than being the proverbial critic that never has a good word to say about anything, think about matters in detail. And rather than being critical, make proposals. So having served as an elected official for 14 years, I always appreciated the people who came to me and said, have you thought about? Or I don't think the decision you made was the best one, and here's what I would recommend, as opposed to getting in my face and being ugly about something. So if there's anything that can come out of this, hopefully it will be a renewed sense of optimism and patience with local officials, knowing that they are under duress like the business community is. And rather than being critical, offer solutions. I think that's probably the best thing that I can say.
I think that that's great advice, and patience is one of those tough virtues, particularly in times like this. That seems like it gets exacerbated even more. Anybody on the call have comments or questions for Dave before we wrap up our conversation for today? I'll pause, and I'm going to mute my line for just a second to give anybody else an opportunity to speak up if you have comments or questions. Well, hearing none, Dave, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. This is hopefully the first installment of what will probably be a series of conversations with different stakeholder groups across the state as a part of the Georgia Chamber's Resiliency and Recovery Task Force. That is going to be an ongoing effort to look at a variety of different policy areas where we can make recommendations both to state and local officials here in the state of Georgia as we emerge from a public health crisis into a period of economic recovery and development. And so with your permission, hopefully we can reach back out to ACCG and continue to partner with you all as we develop those ideas and recommendations and pose those to policymakers all across the state. But I think it goes without saying we stand ready to help and support with anything we can do for our local government partners across the state, and appreciate the partnership that we've had with you over the years, and appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Seth. And if you'll indulge me, I'll take maybe a minute and give you something to think about.
Please
Perhaps
do.
it's probably already on your radar, but if you think about the collections of motor fuel sales taxes or motor fuel taxes in Georgia, you know, the state has an excise tax on gasoline and diesel, but at the local level, it's still a sales tax. And I looked this morning, in January of 19, the average gas price upon which the sales tax was built was $2.49. On June the 1st of this year, they're saying that the average rate is going to be $1.53. So when you look at not only lower sales of gasoline and diesel fuel, but when you look at the lower price, there's going to be an exponential hit to the bottom line on sales tax revenue to local governments from motor fuel sales. So that's something to think about, because it's going to impair, at least for some period of time, the ability.
Good. How are you?
That's a great point, Dave, and I think that speaks back to the revenue conversation we were talking about earlier. And we're getting the question a lot. You know, what does this mean for GDOT? What does this mean for local governments? What does this mean for different agencies across the state that are involved in the development and maintenance of transportation? And it's kind of early to have to be able to develop definitive data-driven trends, but we know, to your point, it's going to be an impact, and I think that's the importance of this ongoing conversation. So in the private sector, we know how we can be supportive of our local government partners and exercise some of that patience that you spoke of. So again, I appreciate the partnership we have with you guys and the expertise that you bring to the table, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in the future.
Thank you, Seth.
Thank y'all for joining us this morning. We will be sending out an email later this week with a member survey. Hopefully you will look out for that coming from the Georgia Transportation Alliance. We will also be including links to today's webinar with Jeff Parker from MARTA, Dave Wills from ACCG, as well as our conversation last week with GDOT Commissioner Russell McMurray and Georgia Ports Authority Executive Director Griff Lynch. So thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. Have a great week. Talk to you all.
Where we recognize that our bus ridership was not down as much as it was in other parts of the country. We've seen about a 35–40% decline in bus ridership. We wanted to make sure that we could encourage social distancing on our buses, so we basically had to double down our bus service on our what we're calling our essential bus routes. We'll talk about that in a minute. So next slide. And this is what we've had to do. We've had to constrict our bus service to 42 what we're calling essential routes. We normally run about 100 routes, but a bus, the capacity of the bus is limited by the social distancing. A bus that normally carries about 40 people can safely today carry about 15 people and allow social distancing to happen. So if you just simply look at the capacity of a bus corridor, we've had to run additional buses and twice as much buses to provide the level of service that our customers are looking for. And in order to do that, we're limited by the number of employees that we have. We're limited by the number of buses that we have. So we worked hard to identify key routes. 42 of them ran service. On the right, in some purple colors, you see the routes that we're not running. Tracking the number of complaints that we have. So as we fine tune our essential bus service, we know where the biggest need is to add service back, and we look to do that in an evolving manner. So next slide. Our ridership has clearly been affected, and this is a national trend. I'll show some statistics around that. This is our rail service. You can see a dramatic decline in ridership, about 85%. We're down about 85%. It's leveled off, relatively speaking. Haven't seen much of an increase. Just anecdotally, the last two Fridays seem to be a little bit busier than the Fridays before that. So maybe we're seeing a small upturn in our rail ridership, but I think it's going to be a while before we return back to normal. The bus side's a little bit of a different story. Next slide. We have not had such a dramatic decline in our bus ridership. We're only down about 45%. You know, it's dramatic, but if you think about the needs of the people who move around the city, the essential workers, some of them lower paying jobs trying to get to work, it's pretty clear that bus service has been a lifeline. And the lack of complete drop in ridership that other systems and our rail system have seen, we've had to double down on the bus service to make sure that we can provide safe and sustainable service. So on a national trend, next slide, the declines in ridership are much more dramatic, put together at a national level. Each one of these colored lines depicts a major transit system around the country, the New Yorks, the Chicagos, the Philadelphias, the San Franciscos. And you can see just dramatic rate of declines. And this is as you can see, a national trend and a national effect, and having some national consequences on the transit industry. So huge impacts on the revenue coming in, whether it's fare collection revenue or sales tax revenue. So like MARTA and many of our other transit systems across the country, or all of our transit systems around the country, we're facing some financial woes in the future, and the federal government stepped up with a CARES Act, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So next slide. So as I said, we are in the middle of our budget process for 2021. Our new year starts in July 1 of 2020 for fiscal year 2021, and it's a significant change into where we have been in the past. And so next slide. So I wanted to show you sort of where we were. This is a picture of our expenses and revenue over on the operating side over the past year, the 4 quarters of 2020 that we're in the 4th quarter right now. And the blue line is revenue, and the red line is expenses. As you can see, in the first 3 quarters, we were running a strong deficit, as we have historically, and creating an ongoing positive trend in terms of our budget. And clearly, as we project where we're going to be at the end of this year, huge impact on a decline in our fare revenue, and also an increase in some of our expenses. But really, the decline is substantial on the revenue side. You can see that we're projecting just a huge drop in our revenue going forward. As many of you know, we're funded. Our largest single funding source is a 1-cent sales tax collected in Fulton, DeKalb, City of Atlanta, and Clayton counties. And our next biggest fare revenue is, or our next biggest revenue source is fare revenue, which has also had a decline. So as you can see, our revenues are expected to fall off going forward. So next slide. So what are we doing about it? We've got a strong plan. The federal government has stepped up several weeks ago, passed one of the bills, the CARES Act, which provided $25 billion to the transit industry. That trickles down through some formulas and will equate to $298 million, little over about $330 million ish is coming to the Metro Atlanta region, 298 coming to MARTA. We've got a financial plan that closes the gap. We'll be using 83 million of that CARES Act money to close our budget shortfall for this year. We've got a plan to have $150 million in revenue coming from the CARES Act for next year, which will build us a surplus over a couple of years and be able to create a glide path to getting back to reality. We see about close to a $600 million shortfall in revenue over a 5-year period. As we look towards our peer agencies, that's pretty meager compared to what a agency like New York City, the transit agencies in New York City, they're predicting just over a 2-year period, close to well over several billion dollars worth of shortfall in order for them to remain solvent. The Federal Transit, the APTA, the trade organization for the transit industry, has done a study and identified that the industry is going to need about $25 more billion in addition to the CARES Act money to remain stable. So while these are dire circumstances, I want to really stress to everyone on this call that we do have a strong financial plan helped by the CARES Act. We do believe that there will likely be some additional federal funding coming. The House has passed a bill that would help with that in a substantial way. We've allocated in our 2021 budget, which will be going to our board of directors next month for their approval, $20 million in contingency funding. So those things that we're not planning on doing and that we need to do additional, we have funding to pay for that, and really are in a position to make sure that we will be stable over the next 5 years and continue to operate with a new normal. Next slide. So in addition to our operating budget, you've seen, we have a very strong, healthy capital program. We're fully funding our capital program. What we've decided to do is make sure that the revenue that is coming in supports in totality our capital program. Next slide. And that the shortfall is in the operating side. We're going to work to becoming a streamlined organization to balance the budget, but we know that critical to the future of this region and is continuing to invest in transit. So we're continuing with our foot on the gas, doing a whole lot of good things. We would have had a ribbon cutting over the past few weeks to open a new entrance to a rehabilitated entrance to Inman Park Reynoldstown Station. So our capital program, the important projects that support the infrastructure that we own continue. Next slide. We have a lot of important projects that we're planning and underway, and we recognize that the airport is a marquee station for us, and a station that people see, and after as they're leaving the airport, it may be the second thing that they see and the second impression they have of Metro Atlanta and Georgia as they transfer from our beautiful, well-maintained airport into our transit system. And we know that we need to match the investment that the city and the airport have made in order to rehabilitate that facility. So we've got a strong plan to completely rehabilitate that airport station. That work will begin later this year. We have a contractor already on board doing a construction management at risk project, and looking forward to seeing an upgraded airport station. Next slide. Other projects that we're advancing, we have a lot of infrastructure that is not so apparent to our customers' eyes, but critical to the operation. We've got some significant track renovations projects that we're undertaking, and those projects are still underway, still going strong. We're trying to accelerate them where we can. Many of these projects require long lead items, the structural steel for the rail. So working with our contractor to make sure that we can advance this project quickly and improve and maintain our critical infrastructure to operate our system. So next slide. Other projects that we have include expansion of our rail system. As you know, both the city of Atlanta raised a half-cent sales tax several years ago. The Clayton County joined the MARTA district, and in both cases, we made some significant commitments to expand and enhance transit in these regions. One of the first projects that we're calling Connect the Core, which will be the region's first bus rapid transit system, going along the property where the baseball stadium was, where Georgia State and Carter is doing some significant development along Hank Aaron Boulevard into the Summer Hill neighborhood. So we're looking forward to advance this. We're committed to making sure that this is a successful project, the first glimpse that this region will have, and with true BRT, working with the city very, very closely to make sure that we can obtain exclusive lanes of traffic for the buses and build a system that will ultimately build ridership. This corridor, touches pieces of the Beltline, and as that transportation node gets built out, we see a larger network being built. So we have received a Tiger grant. The Tiger grant requires that we have it in service by September of 2024, and we're well underway to advance this project. We have made some and received approval from the FTA on some project alignment issues. Basically, the original project went much farther north into Midtown. We now have this project really serving the Georgia State, 5 Points area, but going farther south where we see a lot of development opportunity to connect in with the Beltline. So next slide. Another key project is building out the streetcar system. We, you know, as the Beltline project gets developed, we see that the first extension of the streetcar east extension, is you know, a relatively simpler project. We're advancing the environmental impacts, working with the city and the Beltline to completely define the corridor, but largely we will be expanding the streetcar over to the Beltline in the area of Krog, and then north on the Beltline up towards Ponce City Market, with a plan to have this in operation in 2027. So next slide. Some of the other corridors that you know we're continuing to advance in our transformation program that's funded through both the City of Atlanta and Clayton County joining. We have bus rapid transit corridors that we're considering in the City of Atlanta and in Clayton County, other high capacity corridors. Campbellton Road, a strong corridor where there's a lot of opportunities for you know, for improving the transit service along that corridor. It's a very, very heavily used transit corridor now. Metropolitan and Cleveland Avenue are being planned as sort of a arterial rapid transit, which is a premium bus service, not quite the service that a bus rapid transit corridor would have. Clifton Corridor, we continue to advance, working with stakeholders in that corridor to make sure that we're closing the financial gap as we finalize our environmental process for that, advancing discussions with the railroad so that we have clarity around what impacts and what we need to do in order to satisfy the railroad. But you know, the next step of the Clifton Corridor, which I believe is a critically important project to the region, is really closing the financial gaps that we know we have in order to advance that project. So that's what we're focusing on today around that. Next slide. Our transit or in Clayton County, some projects relatively small but impactful, and some of them larger. We're under construction right now at the Justice Center to build a transit center to allow bus transfers, allow people to purchase Breeze cards. It's under construction now. We'll make some improvements there, and then there'll be a second phase in later years that makes this a more permanent facility. We're focusing on a commitment that was made several years ago to build a bus maintenance and operations facility in Clayton County. And we've also working to expand our commitment to having bus service in Clayton County with some east-west bus routes, the 197 and the 198, critical to Clayton County. As many of us know, so much of our corridors in this region go north and south. So as Clayton County, the original bus service was largely serving corridors north and south. And so people who were trying to move across the county really had difficult times in transit, and these two bus routes will make significant improvement for that. Next slide. We also see improvements in South DeKalb as critical. We've identified and made commitments through our 15th Amendment to our rapid transit contract, 2 transit centers in South DeKalb, one in the area of South DeKalb Mall, one in the area of Stonecrest Mall. You know, we have a lot of buses that move through this community, like, for example, the South DeKalb Mall, the 15, which is one of our busier bus routes in the system, goes north and south, eventually up to Decatur Station, but some other feeder bus routes, the 74 and the 186, will be able to allow people to efficiently transfer, have some level of amenities at these transfer points, allow customers a better environment as they make their journey across the county and into the rail system with this transit center that will to be building over the next couple of years, and those are in the design phase right now. So we're looking forward to advancing that. Next slide. We continue with some very important and transformational TOD projects. I want to provide a quick update on that, and then I'll wrap up with the new normal. So next slide. As that slide's coming up, I'll speak to the next slide. Several things that are going on. We've got Edgewood Candler Park. We've worked with a developer there, constructed not only housing with a substantial increase in affordable housing, but also some office and retail space that we're developing, and working with a nonprofit moving in the spirit to build a dance studio, a nonprofit dance studio that will really serve the community well. Avondale Station is a great project where we've got some opportunities both to work with the county as well as property that we own. Lindbergh Station, as you know, sort of the original MARTA TOD, we have a new developer, Rubenstein Partners, has now taken possession of the property. They are redoing the AT&T facility, making a major investment into the property that they own at Lindbergh City Center, and looking forward to continuing to work with them. And another project that's really exciting is we've broken ground at King Memorial Station, a huge investment in that station on a lot of significantly underutilized parking, 300 multifamily project. We've got 100 affordable workforce housing units, 10,000 square feet of commercial space. So looking forward to that development, building some critical density around that station. Next slide. The one project that I didn't mention that's really transformational is we are going to the board shortly to award a contract at North Ave Station, allowing a commercial building to be built and completely redo the entrance to our station. So more to come on that. Really an exciting project that will be transformational to Midtown, as so many great projects have advanced. The new normal that we have in front of us is really, both challenging and exciting. Next slide. We've got great opportunities in front of us. We're having to make sure that we're doing things, and there's several. If you go to MARTA's YouTube page, there's several videos. I won't show them here, about how we've taken a new, refreshed approach to cleaning our stations. We see this as a critical aspect of making people feel comfortable coming back to public transportation. Worked on several projects and to enhance our cleaning. Next slide. We also know that our passenger and employee safety is critically important, and we need to make sure that that is done. We've worked hard to make sure that our our employees have proper PPE. We require that all of our employees are wearing masks when they're working. We're disinfecting work areas. We're making sure that we're focusing on the areas where our employees who work, our administrative people, when they come back to work, feel comfortable with their work environment. So a lot of opportunities to do things new. and make sure that we're encouraging people to come back. So I would, I'll close as we come to the last slide. Want to advance it one more. We put together a MARTA Heroes video to really highlight the hard work of the men and women who, whether they're police officers or station attendants or cleaners or police officers, just doing great work and making sure that the environment to serve both the essential workers that we've been providing service to, and now our worker, our customers as they return to work are feeling safe and comfortable in this transit environment. So I'm going to close just with this one quick comment that I want to make sure that I'm conveying to everyone on this call that MARTA continues to operate. We're excited about the challenges that we have in front of us. While we do have some fiscal challenges in front of us, they are things that are not unsurmountable. We are committed to continuing to advance our capital program because it is just so important. The investment in transit, both for the existing infrastructure, making sure that what we have is well maintained, but also that we're recognizing that although this this downturn in the economy may be slowing us down, we know that Metro Atlanta and Georgia will continue to grow extremely quickly, and the investment in transportation and transit will be critical to that growth. So we look forward to just continuing on the trajectory that we've been on of success. We see this as a bump in the road for our service, with some uncertainty in front of us, but we're clearly focused on the challenge and look forward to to continuing to be a critical provider of transportation services to this great state and to this metro region. So Seth, I'm going to turn it back to you and thank everyone for their attention.
Jeff, thank you. That's great information and good update. I think as the nation's 8th largest transit system, one of the things that we can say about MARTA over the last decade or so, that it really has been a decade of progress, of growth, and kind of turnaround. And so I think the things that you've outlined here inspire a lot of confidence that is going to continue even in the midst of these tough times. And so we're set to go to Dave Wills and kind of shift the conversation a little bit. But before we do that, just maybe 30 seconds, Jeff, for those of us that are on the line today in the private sector, in the business community, what can we do to be good partners? What can we do to support MARTA and your team there as we continue to emerge from a really tough couple of months and start the recovery and reentry process?
Yeah, I think I think paying attention and having opportunities like this, the reality of what's in front of us is that we will return to, I'll use the most overused catchphrase, a new normal, but people are going to come back to office buildings in downtown and midtown, and students are going to return to work. I was on one of these calls with folks from Georgia State, and it's critical to the Georgia State or businesses that are around our transit stations that people have confidence. So we while we need to convey that all the good things that we're doing and be positive about our future, we also need people like you all to listen to our message and help convey that to others, because there's generally going to be a lot of uncertainty about going back to an office building, right? We're all struggling with how do we bring massive people back to our work environment? Well, it's also a reality of MARTA. We're gonna move from social distancing on buses to something that's closer to what it was 4 or 5 months ago. And people need to have a confidence in an agency like MARTA, and while it's got to originate with the agency, we look towards partners like you to help us convey that message.
Well, again, Jeff, I think it goes without saying the leadership and the turnaround at MARTA over the last couple of years as a true, just a fundamental pillar of our transportation network here in Georgia is pretty unparalleled, and we're grateful for that leadership and for that partnership that we have with you guys. So, best of luck as y'all continue to navigate this.
Yeah.
And on behalf of the GTA board and the chamber board, we thank you for what you're doing, and we stand ready to help any way that we can. So with that, thank you for your time.
All right.
And we look forward to continuing to work with you moving forward.
All right. All right. Thanks,
guys, we're going to transition to a little bit of a different perspective on transportation and local government issues as we